So please, if you have any technical issues, please continue to use the chat feature. And if you have any content related questions, please use the Q&A. You can post the questions, upvote questions, and comment on them in the Q&A. So now we're going to begin our second presentation of the day called Activating Active Learning Spaces using Video Spotlight Coaching and Digital Assessment.
All right. Good morning, everybody. My name is Tiffany Morey, and I am just finished up my PhD in Ag and Extension Education. My colleague, Dr. Daniel Foster, and I are really excited to talk to you today about active learning spaces at Penn State and how we've used them for different purposes in teaching and learning with pre-service teachers. So on the screen, you will see a question that we would like you to engage in so that we can begin. We want to know, how do you use technology for assessment and reflection in your teaching and learning practices? So you'll see that there's a code on the screen. If you could go to slido.com and please respond, we would really appreciate it. All right, so far it seems like Canvas quizzes are the most popular way that we are using technology for assessment and reflection. Seeing a lot of others that come in, clickers, video quizzes. Excellent. Give you another minute because I see we still got a few more people that want to come in. Oh, Kahoot, we're going to play with that later. Foreshadowing, excellent. All right, so I'm gonna stop the screen share with this and transition over so that we can start to talk about how have we been using technology in active learning spaces for our students. All right, so today we have 3 goals as we talk about active learning spaces. We want to describe for you what they are and where they are at Penn State. What are some best practices that we've found for technology-based reflection? And we also want to share some best practices for how you can integrate digital assessment into your courses to make the process more interactive and fun. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Daniel Foster, to explain a little bit about how we came up with these ideas and how they fit in within the context of the course where they were used.
Absolutely. Hey, gang, super excited to join you today in all of the craziness, and proud to be presenting for the first time with Dr. Morey as she's completed her dissertation, and we'll be doing one of those virtual commencement celebrations in August as we navigate this with her first PhD graduation first. Maybe she's going to get another one. I don't know. Big picture here. We got to work in that awesome space that Tim talked about, ASI 110. And it allowed opportunities for active learning. But as I sat back and we were talking about, okay, what are we going to do to use this space to move us along accomplishing some of our core values on how we approach teaching and learning? I will tell you that the courses that we're describing today, I'm hoping that we can move beyond the specific context we worked in, and that you can pull, as the many attendees, from the lessons and apply it to your content. And I know that can be challenging sometimes because we were working with future teachers, future high school agriculture teachers. We are teacher educators. And so it can get very meta, where we're talking about, how teachers will view things and what kind of dispositions and behaviors and skills and attitudes are we embedding. But what we're about to share, I believe, is applicable regardless of whether you're coaching future teachers or not. See, we were thinking about how can we use an active learning space to advance digital fluency and to have more fidelity to our experiential learning process. I know many of you are familiar. I did not make a graphic to show you to do a theoretical framework, but with David Cobb's work from 1984 in the experiential learning model. And I think in our class, we have done an excellent job of identifying concrete experiences. You are going to go do this experience. I think we did a pretty good job of reflective observation, where they're reflecting on their practice. The piece that I was like, man, I don't think we're hitting this one out of the park yet is abstract conceptualization, where they draw conclusions that will lead, and this is where, always begin with the end in mind, will lead to active experimentation. Because our hope is to develop educators just like you, who aren't afraid to experiment and try new technologies to advance their student learning, going back to that super meta process that sometimes we're in. But isn't that the goal of all of us as educators at Penn State, to encourage our learners to be brave and bold for active experimentation within their content? So I look forward to letting Tiffany share with you some of the things that she worked through here, and then I'll be back on at the end if you have any questions that I can help with. I'm sure Tiffany can answer them all. But thank you for allowing us to be here. Tiffany?
All right. So the concept of active learning and hands-on and having students engage in what they're doing is nothing new. John Dewey, who was a prominent education researcher at the beginning of the 20th century, already started to explore how simply the textbook and the teacher were not enough, and that students really needed to be a part of their learning for it to mean something. So active learning today is a hot topic. At Penn State, there are multiple spaces where students can engage in the process of active learning. And so before we set out to talk about it, we wanted to make sure that we had some facts to the research. We are researchers, we backed it up. And so active learning, it can make students more motivated, and it can increase their levels of achievement and personal development because they're really enjoying what it is that they're doing. So at Penn State UP, we have multiple active learning spaces that are available for faculty and staff to use with their students. Like in the previous presentation, we utilized ASI 110 just because it's close, but there's also Alt House and the Dreamery. And within the active learning spaces, you can see it doesn't look like a traditional classroom. Students have flexible seating. There are multiple screens around the room for them to be able to engage in the information that's being presented. They can write on the tables. They can even share what it is that they're doing to a screen in their own pod. This really individualizes the learning experience and takes it from a teacher-centered perspective to a student-centered perspective. Now let's talk about a couple of the different things that we have done specifically with the active learning spaces to really make fun and interesting experiences for our students. So the first thing that we developed was called the Lab Look Back. And reflection is a critical part of the education process. Actually, it's a critical part of most professions to be able to look back at what you did it work? What would I do differently? So to help our students become effective reflective practitioners, we introduced the Lab Look Back. Each week on Friday, we would show 5 minutes of a pre-recorded teaching episode from one of the students in our class. They would have 5 minutes to reflect and look at the video individually and in groups of 2 or 3. And then they would have 5 minutes to respond and share about what they observed, what they would do differently, and what the teacher practitioner did well. The Lab Look Back is also rooted in the literature. So having students engage in video observation and reflection of what they're doing really helps them to become more critical consumers and reviewers of information. And it helps them to really develop their own skills and being able to notice and self-analyze what's going on and when in the situation when they're experiencing it. So the first step of the lab look back is that we would choose a pre-recorded teaching episode from that week that had been uploaded by one of our students to the platform Athena. Just a little background on Athena. It's password protected, and it would allow the students to record an episode, upload it, and then send it to those for which they would like feedback. And feedback could be left in multiple forms, but it is a wonderful tool that has been widely used in the classroom and across all different professions where reflection and looking back on what has been done is important. So we would show a short pre-selected clip to the entire group. And while it was being shown, the students would be asked to keep individual notes and thoughts about what they observed and what was going on. They could do this on their personal devices, they could do it by writing on the tables, and they could also do it by simply keeping notes in a notebook the old-fashioned way. After that, we would give them a scenario that would change the entire context of the video, and they would be asked to revise their reflection to identify what potential changes would need to be made to that teaching episode for it to be successful. They would also propose adaptations to the person that was being observed to help make that lesson a success. And they would identify some good things and bad things that could occur if that adaptation were to be implemented. And we'll give you an example of what one of those scenarios are in just a second. So, the scenario, a technology fail. This is so relevant to what's going on now, especially since we've switched to virtual instruction. So all of a sudden you're going along and you're teaching and it's awesome, and then the internet goes down. You have no slides, you have no lesson plans, you have no nothing. What are you going to do? And so our students would be tasked to respond to that situation and provide advice to their colleagues on what they would do. And all of this communication would occur in Canvas. And so we had a specific discussion forum set up in Canvas. And each week when they walked into the room and I showed the video, I would activate the scenario. They would view it, and then they would respond with their comments in the Canvas discussion forum. And the reason we did this is so that we could create a digital repository of information and suggestions so that the students could look back on it later if, in fact, this scenario ever really happened to them, or they knew that they might experience it. And so they had a teacher toolbox of what they could do when common things in the life of an educator would happen. And then we would have 5 minutes for our group to engage in group discussion and peer reflection and feedback. So each group had an option of how they wanted to share their feedback. They could type it into the response box in Canvas in the discussion forum, or they could also write it on the boards. And we actually found that this was the most popular option. Instead of just being plugged into a device, our students really enjoyed engaging in peer feedback by being able to write and record their thoughts on the tables and the writable surfaces in ASI 110. They would then flip the boards up, and then they could refer to them and keep additional notes while they were sharing with their classmates. And then they would take a picture, put it in the discussion forum, and we had a digital artifact that then could be easily pulled up and referred to if a student wanted to look at it later. So along with reflection, assessment is a really important part of how we know what our students know and how teachers are able to tell if it's time to move on or if they need to be doing something a little bit differently. So to explore different forms of digital assessment in these wonderful active learning spaces where we had so many different forms of technology to play with, the Maury moment was invented. Now, being that we were teaching teachers and we wanted to engage them in proper assessment practices, each Friday we would give them an assessment to check in on how they felt about the content they had learned that week, about the instructional technique they were asked to demonstrate, about the processes of education that they had engaged with previously that week on Monday and Wednesday. In the past, we just gave a pencil and paper assessment. We looked over it and we said, yeah, okay, they know their stuff, or hey, we need to go back and repeat this. But with more and more students becoming digital natives and wanting to use technology and being reliant on technology, we realized we had to find a different way to be able to engage them and make them a part of the learning and assessment process. So the Maury moment was designed. And instead of having a pencil and paper assessment on Fridays, when our students came in, we let them test drive a new digital assessment platform to show them the many different ways that they could assess and learn using technology. It relates back to John Dewey's learning by doing and making a student an active part of the learning process. And the questions that we asked covered the things we had asked them to review during the week and that we had taught to make sure that we were all on the same page and ready to move on to the next step in the instructional process. So the Mori moment is also rooted in research. Assessment is a critical part of knowing what's going on. It's recommended that it is a key part of the pedagogy. And with digital assessment, it can kind of enhance student interest because you have fun options like gamification and all different types of assessment that really engage those different types of learners. Plus, it allows for instantaneous feedback and results, so there's no wondering what do they need to learn, what have they mastered, or what do they need to do next. So how does the Mori moment work? Each week, it followed a set protocol of steps to make sure it was uniform and that it was consistent with the students. So on Monday, I would decide what digital assessment platform we would use. And these suggestions came from all over the place. I stayed friends with a lot of classroom teachers after I left the classroom to come back to be an educator, so I would ask them for recommendations. I would look at what was trending on Twitter, what was trending in the ag teacher discussion groups on Facebook. And from that, I would choose the platform. I'd explore it to see which features and options would be best with our students. And then I would create an account so that when it was time to create the assessment, I was ready to go. Then on Tuesday, I would make a best practices card. And because we were presenting our students with so much information and so many different platforms, this was key. Every week, we gave them a cardstock card that had the name of the platform, a description of the features, and on the reverse side, some advantages and disadvantages of using it so that if they chose to use it with their own students, they would be able to properly understand what situations and scenarios it would be most acceptable for. I would also find an informational video that just kind of introduced the platform and its purpose to show as the interest approach to get them engaged on Friday. On Wednesday, after our students had had their lecture portion of the course on Monday and their lab portion on Wednesday, I would write the assessment questions that best corresponded to the experiences that we had shared that week. On Thursday, I would import those questions into the digital assessment platform, and I would test it out to make sure it was working because, the technology fail, it could still happen. And I wanted to make sure that if we were asking our students to do something new, that it was going to go as seamlessly as possible. And on Friday, we would deliver the Mori moment to the students. It would take about 5 minutes, and then they would get a chance to really play with something new and be assessed in a way that would change their perspective. So what were some of the platforms that we used for the Mori moment? We tried to experiment with a bunch of different ones to give our students ideas of all of the different assessment tools out there and all of the different ways that they could be applied. So we had gamification platforms like Kahoot and summative, where there were multiple game formats and it promoted teamwork. There were things like quizzes and Mentimeter, where we could incorporate a lot of different types of question and also discussion. Purpose games, clickers, kind of changed assessment a little bit because we were able to take traditionally used pencil and paper type questions and put them in a digital form. Clickers was pretty fun because instead of students having to use a device, they were able to use a card with a QR code, and depending on which direction they held the QR code, responded to their answer. And using a smartphone, we would just wave it around, read the QR codes, and we had instant feedback and responses from our students. And then we also introduced another platform called GradeCam. And while this isn't necessarily great for just active assessment, it's a really, really quick way to grade assignments that students have completed traditionally. And so it's a great way to read true, false, multiple choice, and rubrics. And so each week we would bring a new one out and our students would get to test drive it. So we had to use a lot of different forms of technology to be able to support these. However, the technology that we chose, we tried to pick things that were commonly available. Laptops, personal devices, projectors, YouTubes, things that were standard in every classroom across the board at Penn State. And when we needed an additional communication platform, we chose Canvas because all of our Penn State students were provided with an account. But just because it was fun didn't mean that it didn't come with its own set of challenges. It takes time to be able to explore the technology and become comfortable with it. It takes time to put together the different activities to make sure that they're purposeful and intentional to create experiential learning. And we had to make sure that we had the right form of technology, not just ourselves, but our students, and that it was functioning properly so that we could do what we needed to do when we needed to do it. And a further challenge that others might experience are digital comfort constraints. Using different forms of technology can be a little bit scary at times. But if you are willing to be open-minded and take the time to experiment, they can be a lot of fun with your students. So let's look at how do we plan to continue doing this in the future. So we've had success. Our students really enjoyed getting to have these experiences in ASI 110 in the fall 2019 semester. And so the plan is to continue using these tools within courses for assessment and reflection as appropriate. Because the world of digital technology is constantly evolving and changing, we plan to do an annual revision of the platforms to make sure that they still currently reflect what's being used in the classroom or what our students might be asked to be used in their professional career. And we plan to add and remove platforms as needed to make sure that the list is current, up to date, and accurate. Plus, we also found that using variability and changing up the type of platform that was used each week really created novelty. And it was excited, and our students really, really loved not knowing what would happen when they came in the door. So we plan to keep mixing it up so that they don't ever become too comfortable, and it's always going to be that they have that sense of what happens next when they walk in the door. So before I turn it over for questions, we do have a short assessment activity to reflect the Maury moment, and we are going to play Kahoot. And this only has 3 questions, and then we'll open it up for our questions. So if you could please respond to the code that you see on your screen, and I'll leave it open until we have at least 25 people or as many that want to play. All right, last couple people, if you want to join now. Otherwise, we're starting, so we have 2 or 3 minutes for questions. All right, we're gonna start. Yes, there are lots of active learning spaces at UP. There are even more than what is listed, and all of them are available to help you engage in active learning with your students. All right, so Woohoo is winning, followed closely by June. All right, how many steps are there in the lab look back? Yes, there are 3 steps in the lab look back. We present the video, we engage in group reflection, and then we share as a group. And finally, June has moved up. And finally, our last question, the Maury moment was designed to introduce new digital assessment tools, true or false? It is true. We designed it to introduce new digital assessment tools to our students to make more fun and engaging active learning experiences. And now let's see who is the master today. So congratulations, Gertrude and Nerdy Poo and our champion, June. So thank you all for engaging. And with that, we're gonna ask, what questions are there?
We really appreciate you guys joining us and hope you had fun. I'm really proud of Tiffany on how she pulled this presentation together and tried to role model the examples of some of those digital assessments at the end there of connecting. It did make the class more fun. We did indicate, I put a couple of comments in the chat, gang, as Tiffany was sharing, but one thing that I want you to know that we do believe in the idea and the concept of one Penn State. And that means that if you have a question or a concern, or if you just want to bounce an idea, don't hesitate to reach out. Easy to find, Foster at PSU, or on Twitter at Foster Daniel D, and Tiffany shared those, her account as well. But I didn't share Tiffany's email and things because, you know, she's looking for that JOB. So we'll see what her email looks like at what institution here shortly. But there we go.
All right, so we do have a few questions. Do you want to take them, or would you like me to take them?
I didn't see any questions in the Q&A pod, but I can look into the chat pod here.
I see there's two. I have the chat box up.
Yeah, you
So,
take Kahoot cost. How much did that cost?
So Kahoot is free. You can have a minimal free account. You can't necessarily use all of the different question types, but you can create a Kahoot like what I just showed here. It's one person creates, and then whoever has the code can chime in for free. And yes, I can go back to the slide where the assessment tools are listed. So I'm going to navigate back to that really quickly. And here's
everyone's asking about these different types of more moments. I'll just remind you, you know, we can steal, the best teachers are the best thieves, steal great ideas from secondary education all the time. And so a lot of these were inspired by what were being used by individuals with broad-based classrooms and no money. And that's one reason why we were introducing them in our class.
All right, so I'm going to stop the share for a second so that I can see the Q&A pod.
The next question I see in there is about smart, and I'm sorry I'm going so fast. I know our time will be limited and trying to get a lot of these answered. Let's look at Marcus's questions about the idea of, hey, yo, dude, we're at the Commonwealth campus. We don't have ASI 110. I really do believe that the process wouldn't require that space. That space just allowed it to be more dynamic. So I don't want to diminish the space, but I could do it in other rooms as well. Just you spend that time moving tables. We also acknowledge the fact that it's scary as hell to think about what the fall looks like. And I'll say it straight out. I will be creative and as innovative as we can on designing, but we don't have a classroom, what they love writing and doing. So we will be exploring Zoom and doing breakout rooms and allowing them to create different artifacts to accomplish those same entities. One thing that I'm proud of Tiffany for doing is by showing Kahoot, a lot of people have seen that in secondary rooms of only working when you're in the space face to face. She just role modeled on how you could use it at the end of a class to go over your objectives. I thought that was pretty cool. Tiffany, do you want to take, which question do you want to take?
Could Plickers be used for remote teaching by sharing the QR code that's on the cards in Zoom? That is more of an in-person tool. So the teacher or the instructor has an iPad or a cell phone with the QR reader, and they flip the cards, and then you have to read it there. However, you could possibly invent a system where students could hold up different color cards in Zoom, and it would mimic the same thing. So like red for A, blue for B, and that would be a way that would be easily applicable. If you have questions about adaptations, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter, and I will be happy to provide you with my email address and we can connect. But I'm really, excited to help you implement these tools if you would like. So thank you so much.
We're bouncing out, and we'll type question answers in the Q&A pod. Thanks, Tim.
Yep. Thank you, Tiffany and Daniel. Yeah, you can continue to, if you have some questions you still want to ask, please use the Q&A pod, and Daniel and Tiffany can answer those for you. So again, thank you, Daniel and Tiffany, for showing us how you've leveraged technology and active learning spaces to engage and promote authentic learning and assessing your students. So we have another round of Penn State News trivia for our audience members while we get ready for the the next presentation. So you can see Penn State professor Sandra Spanier recently released a book of letters from this famous 20th century author. And Penn State Media Commons has had how many global visitors to their website using their resources after spring break, after we went to the remote learning period. So we'll give everyone a few seconds to answer those. All right. So it looks like for the first question, Ernest Hemingway was the correct answer, and it looks like the majority of the folks that answered did get that correct. And for the second question, again, the majority did get that correct. Over 120,000 page visits for the Media Commons.